Hey, Walter Sorrells back with another Pops knife making project of the month. Today, the lion killer. In a minute, we'll be making sparks, but first, a story. So, imagine you're on a hunting trip in South Africa. You're riding your horse through the pitch black night to find a water hole when you hear something stirring in the tall grass in front of you. You figure it's an antelope, a warthog. Nope. A few seconds later, about 3-4 yards in front of you, you see a couple of lions rising up out of the grass. You try to rein your horse around, too late, wham! The lion hits your horse in the rump, knocks you out of the saddle, tries to bite you in the head, misses, grabs you by the shoulder, and starts dragging you away into the bush while the second lion takes off after your fleeing horse. That's the situation that Harry Wallhuter found himself in one night about 120 years ago. Rifle lost in the darkness, right arm just shredded, lion clamping him in his jaws. So what do? Well, what Harry Wallhuter did was grab for his sheath knife with his left arm, feel around for the lion's shoulder so he could locate the heart, and then he stabbed him twice in the heart and once in the throat. What followed was a night of sleeping in a tree, bleeding all over, while the surviving lion wandered around his tree waiting for him to lose consciousness and fall out on the ground. I won't tell you the rest of the story, but obviously he made it home to tell the story. Now, the knife Harry used to kill that lion still survives. It's in a museum in South Africa, and today we're going to make a version of it for my Pops Project of the Month. Let's get started, and I'll tell you more about the project and the story as we work. I'm going to make our blade today from S30V steel. Of course, a knife back in 1903 would have been made from high carbon steel, but we're not back in 1903, so for this project, stainless. By the way, if you want to make this knife, Pops has a downloadable pattern seen here. Same basic dimensions as Harry Wallhuter's original knife. They got it perfectly sized so you can just print it, cut it out, and you're ready to rock. I'll begin by painting the steel with layout fluid. Last week when we were talking about the project, Joey at Pops asked me what kind of layout fluid I used. When I told him, he said, "You got to try this stuff." Wolf layout fluid comes in 2 colors, and the little applicator puts on a really nice smooth coat, unlike the brush that some brands supply. Low odor, fast drying. I'm really liking this stuff. Anyway, a little spray adhesive and stick it to the knife. Trace with a scribe, and your profile's done. Before I head to the grinder, I'll lay out the location of the pins. I'm using brass Corby fasteners, so I'll drill a hole just the right size for the shank. A little tapping fluid, and off we go. Today's video is, of course, sponsored by Pops Knife Supplies. Pops has everything you need for knife making: steel for both stock removal guys and hammer bangers, a huge supply of handle materials including all kinds of woods, bone, horn, antler, tons of cool micarta including Pops specialty vintage micarta, all sorts of abrasives, every kind of belt you can think of, sandpaper, specialty abrasives, as well as fasteners, tools, you name it. But here's the secret sauce. All 4 partners at Pops are pro knife makers, so if you need a little guidance on what kind of belt or steel or sandpaper is right for the knife that you're making, there are folks on hand to help you figure out exactly what you need. Now comes time for grinding. As I've showed in many of my other videos, if you don't have a grinder, you can do this work with a metal file. I'm using the VSM Blue Destroyer ceramic belt for the foundation grinding, then I finish up with 120 grit ceramic. Scribing in some guidelines for the bevels. Now it's on to the trickiest part of the grind. Long, high bevels on thin blade stock are just about the most technically difficult grinds to do, whether you're grinding freehand like I'm doing here, or whether you're using a jig. It's a little wobbly here at the start, but once everything's stabilized, I'll just push on up to my lines. If you're curious about why the guys at Pops have taken up the banner of this particular knife, one of the partners, Dirk Lutz, is South African. He got the other guys excited about the story, and they decided to do a little challenge with the knife. So if you want to make this knife, you can share it with the world on their Facebook page. All the Pops partners have made a lion killer, so you can check them out and see which one you like best. So if you look at this shape and think it looks sort of like a kitchen knife, you'd be right. Harry Wallhuter went back to London and went back to the shop, T. Williams of Smithfield, where he'd bought the previous knife. There he found the exact pipe brand knife he'd killed the lion with and bought a dozen of them. Never killed another lion with one though. By the way, if you're interested in picking up the actual knife made for this video, I'll have it available on the specials page of my Tactics Armory website. Only one made. The knife I did in last week's video sold in about 4 hours, so if you'd like it, don't wait around too long. Link in the cards and description. For the scales, I'm using 25-year-old vintage micarta. As micarta ages, it oxidizes and changes color a little, so you can get a nice organic look depending on where and how you grind it. It basically oxidizes from the outside in, and so you get this skin or bark that's a darker color than the inner material. Vintage micarta is kind of a specialty of Pops, so they've got all kinds of fun stuff there in a variety of sizes and shapes. At the time of this video, they're running a sale on 1/4, 3/8, and 400 thou thicknesses at half the regular price. Obviously, you may be watching this 10 years later, so don't expect the sale to go on forever. Corby fasteners have a thin shank, about 177 thou, and then a 1/4 inch head, so you want to drill the holes with a step drill, which gives you 2 different diameters to fit the fastener. I'm a big fan of Corby fasteners. The basic idea is that you screw them in and then grind the tops of the heads off, and you have this nice smooth pin, but they fasten a lot more securely than a normal pin. Calculate the shank length minus the stock thickness divided by 2, and that's how long you want the depth of the big step on top to be. The deal is that if you go too deep, the Corby won't seat correctly and can develop play over time, so give yourself a little extra meat for the Corby to bite into. Time to heat treat the blade now. This is specialized heat treating foil, not aluminum foil. The idea here is to protect the steel while it's in the furnace and keep it from oxidizing. For a knife like this, I heat treat my S30V at 1950 Fahrenheit, soaking for 30 minutes and then plate quenching. Stainless steel has to be heat treated in a fairly accurate heat treating oven. If you want to do this and you don't have one, don't despair. There are professional heat treaters out there who can do this work for you. I'll temper at 400, 2 cycles of 2 hours. Now I'm cleaning the scale off the blade and bringing the bevel grind to its final dimensions. At this point, I'm using 160 micron 3M Trizac structured abrasive belts, which I love for finishing bevel grinds. They aren't fast, but they're very smooth and predictable with no belt bump. I've said it a million times, but I always recommend that you try new belts as often as you can. Basically, every time I order belts, I like to order something that I've never used before. That way you can see how they work for your processes and the kind of knives that you make. I should mention that the guys at Pops can be very helpful with this if you're looking for help with specific applications. I'll go ahead and trim the scales, then profile and polish the front face, which always has to be done before glue up and assembly. As you can see, after buffing, it has a wonderful warm chocolatey look. Next, I'll put the scales on. If you just run down to your local big box store looking for epoxy, I've found it's pretty difficult to find slow cure products. Most are the 5-minute types that don't leave any room for error. BSI epoxies are really popular with hobbyists in a lot of fields for model building, things like that, where you need a little extra time to get everything kind of set up and squared away before it cures. Knife making's no different. A little trick I like to use for mixing is just to throw some tape on the workbench, mix it up, then peel it off and throw it all away when you're done. It's always smart to kind of rehearse your glue up processes so that you have everything you need without having to rummage around the shop while your epoxy's hardening on you. Working with Corby fasteners, make sure you got 2 screwdrivers, plus some solvent for cleanup, rags, clamps, whatever else you might need. Every handle's a little different. Here's where the 2 screwdrivers come in. Next day, we'll pull it apart and grind the handle to shape. Be careful with Corby pins not to grind the pin heads too fast. If you heat them up too much, you'll actually burn the epoxy and the joint might fail. Plus, it smells horrible. The more squared off the handle, the more work I can do on the flat platen. The more curvaceous it is, and the more it has internal curves on the spine or the handle side, the more I like to do on the slack belt setup. I'll work my way up to 400 grit on the grinder, then I'll finish it off with some hand sanding at 1000 grit. I don't always buff my micarta, but in this case, this vintage material really responds well to buffing. So let's take a run at that. Now, if you haven't used buffers before in knife making, be really careful. They're generally considered to be the most dangerous thing in the knife making shop. They can just snatch a knife and fling it across the room. So I always try to kind of hook my thumbs under it or whatever and really avoid letting anything that has sort of a shelf on it to get into the meat of the buff. And there we are. Now, I've never been attacked by a lion, but I had a pretty close shave with a groundhog out near my mailbox recently. Next time, Mr. Groundhog better be ready. Alright, I hope you enjoyed the story of the Lion Killer and seeing it made. Like I said, if you want to make your version of the Lion Killer and show it off to the world, I'll throw a link in the description to the Pops Facebook page. Join us again next month for another cool Pops Project of the Month. Thanks for watching, guys. If you like what we're doing here, please subscribe and make sure that you click on that bell so you get notified of all the latest videos. Want to buy a knife from me? Check out my modern blades at tacticsarmory.com. Digging the channel? You can support our video making efforts on Patreon. You know, I've been banging away on these videos for like 10 years, so I hope you'll show some love for all that hard work. Link in the cards and descriptions. Finally, if you're interested in making Japanese swords, check out my full line of Japanese sword videos where I show how to forge Japanese swords as well as how to polish them and how to make fittings, handles, and scabbards. WalterSorrellsBlades.com.